It's truly a blessing to be here with y'all today, and it's a blessing I have my mother here today, and I think she could have helped write Proverbs 13 because she knew not to spare the rod. And the first verse we're going to be looking at is Ephesians 4, and it's verse 26 through 27. It reads, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." Here, Paul is telling us that as people of faith, we cannot not have priorities set into the world, but we have to have priorities to where anger doesn't affect us. And when we get mad, there's no excuse to sin. Let's be honest, there's never an excuse to sin. But when you allow your anger to go unresolved, it's kind of like a cut. We've all had it cut at some point in time. And we know what happens if you don't take care of it. It becomes sore, red, there's stuff coming out of it. You don't even know what it is. And we know that it can become infected. And when it becomes infected, it's going to harm us. It could even lead to death. And that's what the enemy wants when it comes to anger. He wants us to not resolve it to where it starts infecting our lives and those around us. And it also says here, don't give the enemy the devil a foothold. And that's a secure position. And it reminds me, I was watching this show, and the guy's name was Alex Honnold, and he did what's called solo climbing. And there was a mountain in the Yosemite, and it's called El Capitan, and it's a rock face 3,000 feet high. And he climbed it with his climbing gear over 60 times. So he's getting prepared. He's learning a way where he could put his foot, where he could reach, where he could shimmy up. So then he eventually climbs it without no gear, and that was the first time he did that. But that reminded me of like how the devil is. He's trying to see us and what we do to where he can know where to place his foot, where he could place his hand, where he could keep advancing. And we got to know that we can't give him that secure position to keep advancing, because as followers of Christ, we have to be mountain movers. We can't allow the devil to advance on those mountains. And also it reminds me of a story of a husband and a wife. And he says, "Honey, every time I get mad at you, you never fight back. You never get upset. How are you able to control your anger?" And she says, "Well, I just clean the toilet." And he got confused for a moment, and he asked her, "How does that help you with your anger?" And then she says, "I just use your toothbrush." So that shows that in that moment that she was letting her anger go unresolved. But it tells us that our thoughts, when they are angry, they can lead into sinful thoughts. They can lead into actions even. And we never want those thoughts to become actions. And anger is a human emotion. God gave us a broad range of emotions, and it's good to have those emotions. It's what you do with that emotions that is most important. When you're angry and you allow that to lead into sin, that's when it's the wrong kind of anger. So you have to ask yourself, do you have anger towards somebody in your life? Do you allow anger of a certain situation to linger in your life? It's important to know that we have to give it to God, and we have to know that it's not his way. And I had a few truths that I found when I was doing this sermon, and one of the first truths is anger, it doesn't reflect God. And in we have James, and it's chapter 1, verse 19 through 20. "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." And then we see here, James is telling us that when we don't control our anger, that we're not having faith in God. That's saying that you're in that moment, you're in your own mind, you're in your own thoughts, and you're not handing it over to God at that moment. And one of our purposes in life, when we're out in public or we're dealing with family, we always have to reflect God. Some of his attributes are that he's faithful, that God is pure, and he's just. We never know when someone might be dealing with something, or they might not go to church, they might not read the Bible, they're not in the Word. So your actions might be a way to lead them to God. The way you treat them, the way you act, it's important to know that we have to reflect God in our actions. And to be honest, anger never works. Especially those that have kids. We know when you're yelling at them, we have authority, so they might do it, but they're thinking in the back of their mind they wanted to be doing anything but what you had told them to do. But even me as an adult, when someone's yelling at me or having attitude about something, that never helps out the situation. Me being a manager, I had to change my ways that I did manage, because I was the type, oh, I'm the manager, I'm telling you to do it, you just do it. And I wasn't thinking about the why of situations. If somebody was curious about a question, or not empowering them to let them know that they're important, that they are needed. That's very important, especially in the body of Christ. We got to let everybody know that they're important and they have a role. And when we're selfish and we act like a dictator, we are not reflecting God. And we got to remember that God is in control. It's important to know that. Life's going to be situations where we're just uncertain. But when we give it to God and know he's in control, it's going to work out for us, because his plan sometimes isn't our plans, and his timing isn't always our timing. And we got to know that he always provides what is needed, and he's always just. There's sometimes we're going to be in situations where we feel that it's not fair, that someone's getting away with something, or, that you're in the wrong, but they're still getting the right, if that makes sense. But God, he is a just God, so he is going to have the right time. So we just have to realize that no matter what, people aren't getting away with doing wrong, because God, he is just, and he will bring justice. A second truth that I have is anger makes you look foolish. And I'm sure we've all experienced that. After we get angry, we have that feeling. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 9, it says, "Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the laps of fools." And that always makes me think like an evil villain, he gets a cat in his lap, but a fool, he got anger in his lap. And we have to remember that it's a practical wisdom that we need to value when we're learning from the Word. And we can't allow anger to control us. We can't be able to lose our temper, because we do run the risk of looking foolish. And nobody wants to look foolish, especially when it comes to you trying to make a point. If I get angry with somebody, and I have this at work sometimes, I'll be talking to somebody, we're talking about God, we're talking about this, and a donor will come up and they'll say something about, I don't believe in that, I don't believe in this. If I get angry with that person, am I going to get through to them, or am I going to be able to state my case in a pure way? No, it's going to turn into an argument, a battle, a back and forth, and that's never good. We're both going to look foolish. And that ignores godliness when we get angry like that, and it leaves us to not have common sense. And we got to know that a foolish person allows their emotions to control them. And someone told me something one time that I thought was really good. They said, sometimes emotions lie. And that's true. You might be thinking something is going on, and it might be totally different. So we can't be led by our emotions and anger. And Benjamin Franklin once said, "Anger is never without a reason, but seldom with a good one." And I thought that was so good, because you may have a reason to be angry. We all may have reasons to be angry. But is it really worth losing our integrity in God for that reason? It reminds me of my brother and my friend. We're grown at this time, and they're playing a video game. It's Madden. It's a football game. And the game starts, it's friendly, Well, someone starts losing. So now the anger kicks in. They're getting madder. Now they're arguing. You have two grown men arguing over a video game that has no relevance in the real world. It has no relevance whatsoever. So it got to the point where they're saying, let's go outside and fight. And I was like, okay, I got to intervene now. And I told them, I said, you guys are fighting over a video game right now. You look so foolish. And I was like, this is perfect for this sermon. I was like, so God does give you some stories, because that was probably 10 years ago. But I was thinking, like, how dumb it was for them to be arguing over something that wasn't even relevant. And we have to know, before you allow anger to take over, you have to recognize your triggers. I know when I'm starting to get anger. I struggled with anger when I was younger very badly. And, you could go to all kinds of classes and therapies and different things, but when you have God in your life, when you have Jesus, that's the best thing you can have for anything that you're struggling with. I realized no matter what, that I have him and I can lean on him. But one of my triggers is I start clenching my fist. I feel when I'm getting angry, you're like, oh, you feel that anger coming. I get all hot and different things, but I recognize that trigger now, and you have to have a plan. You have to see what your triggers may be when you're starting to become angry. And it's simple as going to the fridge and getting something to drink, just to take that time to pause, cool off. Even going outside and walking, like, the world is so beautiful. People just don't think about it nowadays. Like, it's all the electronics and different things going on in the world. It's so nice to just be outside in the peace of God and just to walk and see all his beautiful creations. That can help you just calm down, and it helps you leave a situation that is just going to turn into something that's not going to be good for you or the other person. So having that strategy and recognizing the triggers is very important. A third truth that I have is you can overcome anger with forgiveness. And I think a lot of people struggle with this. And I struggled with it when I was younger, forgiving. But we see in Colossians chapter 3, verse 13, it says, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you have a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And Paul here, he's telling us that we got to keep our emotions balanced. I heard a few different times, especially in sports like football, you'll hear a player or a coach say, oh, I can't let my emotions get too high after a win or too low after a loss. Because if your emotions are an all-time high and then something happens, because we go through trials and tribulations, things are going to happen in the world, that's going to have you crashing down. And if your emotions are lower than that, that's when the enemy is going to do his best work. If you drop lower, that's when he's going to start with the depression and the thoughts of suicide. You see it in the world so often now. It's disheartening to see it, like all the young kids that just take their lives because they let that low get too low. But we have to remember to keep our emotions balanced. And offense, it's so strong in the world now. When people feel offended, the anger comes out, the arguments start, the fights start. Sometimes you got to take that offense and, as they say, take the high road, because the enemy is going to use that to cause confusion and anger. So we have to be able to let our offenses go and hand them over to God. And something that's important, I think, too, in that verse, it says, forgive as the Lord forgave you. I know how many times I have been down a road where I know God wasn't happy with me. I know he wasn't satisfied with the way I was living, with the things I was doing, but I'm always able to repent. I'm always able to go back and tell God, I'm sorry, please forgive me. And I have Jesus that died on the cross. His blood has separated me from my sin, and I have that luxury to forgive. And God, he tells us that we need to forgive, because I know if he didn't forgive, a lot of us would be in trouble. So we have to think like God does and have that heart to forgive others. Because another thing that's important about forgiving is it weighs on you too. Because there might be a person that does you wrong and they don't even think about it. They're not worried about it. They're just going along with their day. And who's it bothering you? It's you. So sometimes we have to forgive for our own peace. And there's a quote that I had seen, and it says, I never knew how strong I was until I had to forgive someone who wasn't sorry and accept an apology I never received. And I think that's so good because it just tells us that you can be strong and we can be strong because God lets us know when we are weak, he is strong. He lets us know that. And it reminds me of a situation with my brother and another friend. And it's not about video games this time. But they were out on the road, and he introduced drugs into my brother's life. And he got back off the road, and it really hurt him and I's relationship. And he was thinking things that weren't true, and it really did hurt our relationship. And I was so angry at that guy. Like, we grew up as friends, but my brother's grown. I understand that. Like, he makes his own decisions too, so I hold him accountable for that. But I was so angry at that guy for introducing these drugs into his life, and I was on Facebook Messenger every day, and I'm telling him how much I hate him and how much I want to hurt him, and I can't wait to find him. And the enemy was just using me. Like, he was using it as fuel, and every day this was on my mind. And then one day God told me, he said, I got bigger things for you. I got bigger plans for you. But that's not going to happen if you stay in this pain, if you stay in this hurt and this anger. So I messaged him one day. I apologized. I told him that I wasn't going to be messaging him and saying crazy things anymore, that I loved him and I just wanted the best for him. And from that moment on, I had a peace that I haven't felt in a long time. But it took me realizing that God had a bigger plan for me, and I was allowing the enemy to infiltrate my thoughts and use me. So it's important to remember that when you're angry, that it can lead you away from God. And we never want to be away from God. And the enemy will use that as a ball and chain. You might be moving in your faith, but when you're attached to a ball and chain, you only get so far. You're only going to be able to move so far. And that's where the enemy wants you. He wants you to think that you can move around, but he has you trapped. And we got to remember, too, that you can't block your own blessings through hurt and pain and anger. You never want to block your own blessings. A fourth truth that I have is there is a right kind of anger. And we see in Matthew chapter 21, verses 12 and 14, Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. The blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. Here we're seeing Jesus having the right kind of anger. He's having righteous anger. He is hurt because he's seeing people being taken advantage of. And that makes him upset. And that's how we should be in our lives when we see an injustice. But also seeing the market that should be outside the temple, it's inside. They're using it, and I could just see the priest having the market inside so he can have his eyes on everything. He can have the extra money that people are being charged for the animals. And it's just, he's hurt by that also, seeing that they're not using it for the house of prayer. We see that prayer is very important to Jesus too. He has a passion for it. It's important to have people able to come to God and worship and pray, and they can't do that with a bunch of tables in the way. So we see he's driving people out. Even in John chapter 2, verse 12, it says that he had made a whip and he was knocking things over. And I was thinking when I was reading that verse, like, Indiana Jones probably didn't realize that he's not the best with a whip, Jesus is. But we also know that they were using the area as a shortcut. Imagine if we were having service and someone just decided to walk through here just so they could get to another place. I preached at a church. It's one level, so it made a little more sense than here. I don't think they'll need a parachute to walk through to get somewhere else in this building. But it's just sad to see that how people were using it for the wrong way, but Jesus had the right kind of anger in that moment. And it also reminds me of God's wrath. It's not a reckless rage. It's not uncontrolled anger. It's not a senseless fury. It's not an unjust vengeance. It's a controlled response. Because people that disrespect God, it's a belittling to his holiness. And there's nobody that's going to say, oh, God's angry at me for no reason. We have to take accountability of that, and people in the world have to take ability of that. I hear so many times that, oh, why would God do this? Why would God get angry? Why he seems so hateful, this and that. But we do it to ourselves. If everybody was moving in Christ and had love and peace, we wouldn't have any of those problems. And it reminds me of a woman. I was leaving Walmart one day, and this lady's just screaming at her kid at the top of her lungs. And I just felt so bad. I went over to her. I said, ma'am, you don't need to be screaming at your kid like that. And she said, well, who are you? You don't know me. You can't tell me how to raise my kid. And then I was thinking, I was like, yeah, she's right. I said, ma'am, I don't know you, and I don't know what was going on for you to be yelling at him. But how would you feel if somebody was yelling at you like that? And at that moment, she stopped, and you could tell she was getting emotional. And she said, my husband, he does yell at me like that. He does treat me that way. And then she bent over, and she gave her kid a hug, and then she said sorry. But I was glad that I went and talked to her and made her realize that someone had treated her the exact same way, and it didn't make her feel good. And that's the kind of righteous anger that we got to have when we see something wrong. As people of faith, we have to step up sometimes. I feel a lot of times people now, with the offense that we talked about previously, that people want to just tuck back. They don't want to say nothing. They don't want to be bold for God. And I feel like we have to be bold for God, because if nobody else is, then nobody will. So we have to remember that righteous anger is a good thing. It isn't bad. And we have to allow that to push ourselves to do something about it. We got to be able to know when something's wrong is being done, and we got to be that source of light. A fifth truth that I have is anger affects your peace. And when you have peace, it's a feeling that is just so incredible. When you have that peace of Jesus in your life, no matter what's going on, it could be so crazy. The world could be flipped upside down. But when you have that peace, you know God's there, that he's going to make everything right. And we have to have that faith in him. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 15, it says, let the peace of Christ rule in your heart, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Here, Paul is telling us that we have to pursue peace. We have to make sure that it's a priority of ours to have peace. And we got to have peace with each other. We got to stay in tune with each other, especially in the church. You know, sometimes you have people that think, oh, I know so much. I know all these scriptures. I know all these verses. I read the book. But the weakest member of the congregation is the strongest in that way, because we have to be together. And it's important to instruct others, and it's important to direct people using good sense and common sense, especially when it's other people in faith. And we know that we have to have gratitude. We got to thank God. We have to be able to know that everything he's doing in our lives has a purpose, and he is giving us that peace. It's kind of like we can't swim and we're drowning. God comes into our lives. He helps us. We learn how to swim, and then we just forget about God. We should be always remembering it's God that is doing it for us, and we should be thankful. And honestly, anger will eat away at your peace. It will slowly eat away until there's nothing left. It might not be all at once, but it will eventually leave you feeling empty. And we know that Satan will use anger to destroy your peace. He wants to destroy relationships that you have. He wants to destroy your life. And ultimately, he wants to destroy you. He don't want you to have any peace. And that's what's so tricky about the enemy. He'll try to bring you peace and other things. But those things won't last. Those things will fade away. We have to have peace that Jesus brings to our hearts, because that's going to be an everlasting peace. And I was thinking about a scene that I was watching Forrest Gump. It wasn't recently, but I was thinking about a scene where Lieutenant Dan, they just bring up a net, and him and Forrest are looking at each other, and the net's empty, and he says to Forrest, "Where's your God now?" Well, the next scene right after that, they're in this huge storm. It's like a hurricane going on. Lieutenant Dan's at the top of the boat, and he's arguing, he's yelling, he's screaming. He's angry at God. He's battling and challenging God. But after that, they were the only boat left, so they were getting all these shrimps, and things are going well. And Lieutenant Dan looks at Forrest, and he says, I never thanked you for saving my life. And then he hops off the boat, and he's swimming, and there's that beautiful sunset in the background, and the sky is just beautiful. And in the narration, Forrest says, he didn't say it, but I think Lieutenant Dan found his peace with God. And that's how it is, too, in our lives. Sometimes when things go wrong, we want to battle and go against God, and we try to blame him for different things. But when we walk in faith, we realize that we have to be at peace with him. We can't be battling with him. We have to take what he gives us because, like I said, we're going to have trials and tribulations, so it's important. But I thought it was good that he said that he found his peace with him. And the devil, he'll definitely try to steal your peace, and it's important to know that we can't allow him to do that. We have to replace our anger and separate it from the enemy. We have to put it in God. We have to stand with Jesus, and we got to know God is working for the good in our lives, and he can overcome anything. And with the conclusion that I wrote, anger can be a strong emotion that becomes bad when it's not righteous and leads to sin. You don't always feel in control, and that allows anger to come into your life like a raging bull. But remember, God is in control of all things, and you must lay it down at his feet. People are going to upset, offend, and hurt you. Forgive them, not for their sake, but for your own. Use anger as a tool to do what is right when you see injustice, when you see things that are morally wrong. Most important, keep God at the center of every problem, situation, and relationship. Allow Jesus to be your peace, and he will guard it.